I built the king who discarded his queen, then karma came for him, his karma, her story. The lawyer slid the divorce papers across the mahogany table, and I watched my 12-year marriage dissolve into legal terminology I could barely comprehend through the tears blurring my vision. Marcus Braxton, the man I built from absolutely nothing, the man whose very breath I had sustained when the world abandoned him, sat rigidly beside his attorney with eyes that refused to meet mine while our children waited in the car outside in the scorching Lagos heat, completely unaware that their father had just erased us from his future with the stroke of a pen. The temporary support offer was a pathetic $3,000 monthly for 2 children and no home, while Marcus wore a Rolex watch on his wrist worth more than 6 months of that support combined. The irony stabbed at my heart. I had sold my grandmother's antique jewelry, the only precious thing I owned, to buy him his first decent interview suit 7 years ago. I am Bridget Whitmore Okafor, a British-Nigerian woman whose white South African mother married a Nigerian businessman and raised me between Cape Town and Lagos, and this is the story of how I learned the hardest way possible that building a king from nothing does not guarantee you will remain his queen when he finally wears the crown. My mixed heritage made me always feel like I had to prove my place in both worlds, and I thought loving Marcus completely would finally give me the belonging I craved, the home my fractured soul had always searched for. But before I tell you how my world shattered into a million pieces, let me introduce you to the 4 men whose stories are woven into mine like threads in a tragic tapestry. There was Marcus, my husband, the man I molded from dust into gold, who looked at me like I hung the moon when he had nothing, and looked through me like I was invisible once he had everything. Then there was Ryan Sullivan, an Irish musician who sang my sister songs about forever while bleeding her bank account dry. Across the ocean in America, there was Trevor Banks, a doctor who built his medical career on his girlfriend's broken back, then discarded her like trash the moment he wore his white coat. And finally, there was Nathan Cole, a tech genius who coded his way to millions while his wife's hands cracked and bled from styling hair to pay their bills, only to delete her from his life like a computer virus. 4 men. For empires built on women's sacrifices. For betrayals that taught us the cruelest lesson a woman can learn, that some men see your love as a ladder, climbing on your back to reach the top, then kicking the ladder away once they arrive. I met Marcus Chukwuma Braxton when I was 22 years old and working as a secretary at a telecommunications company in Victoria Island, Lagos. He was 24, unemployed, and sleeping on his uncle's boys' quarters floor in Yaba with dreams that were infinitely bigger than his empty wallet and borrowed clothes that hung loose on his thin, hungry frame. My father, a successful Nigerian import-export businessman with traditional values etched in stone, forbade the relationship immediately when he learned Marcus had dropped out of the University of Lagos in his 3rd year because his family could not afford the fees. My mother, a white South African woman who had defied her own racist family to marry my father 30 years earlier, cried genuine tears and begged me not to waste my youth on a man with nothing but eloquent words and unfulfilled potential. She held my face in her trembling hands, her eyes wet with desperation, and whispered, "Bridget, my darling girl, I also believed in love conquering all obstacles, but I married a man who already had something to offer beyond promises. Please, please don't make a harder choice than I did. I cannot bear to watch you suffer." But Marcus held my hands in his calloused palms, rough from poverty and odd jobs that paid pennies, and spoke about engineering and construction and transforming the urban housing crisis across Nigeria with such passionate conviction, such raw vulnerability in his eyes, that I believed our love alone could build empires from dust. His voice shook when he promised me a future, and I felt something in my chest crack wide open and pour itself at his feet. I did not listen to my mother's wisdom because I was young and stubborn and convinced that my loyalty would be rewarded with lifetime partnership and gratitude. I believed love was a sacred contract that could never be broken. I married Marcus at the Ikoyi registry with only my younger sister Maya as witness because my parents refused to attend what they called my funeral disguised as a wedding. My mother wept on the phone that morning, and I heard my father's voice in the background saying, "She has chosen her path. We cannot save her from it." The devastation in their voices should have been my first warning, but I was too intoxicated by love to hear it. The first 5 years of our marriage tested every single promise Marcus had made during our whirlwind courtship when words were cheap and hope was abundant. I worked my secretarial job during the day, answering phones and managing schedules for executives who earned more in bonuses than I made in annual salary, and then I tutored secondary school students in English and mathematics on weekends because one salary could not sustain two adults and the massive dreams Marcus carried like sacred burdens on his shoulders. My body ached constantly from exhaustion, my eyes burned from sleepless nights, but I pushed through because I believed we were building something beautiful together. I paid rent for our single room in Suralere where the ceiling leaked disgusting brown water every rainy season and darkness came nightly because we could not afford a generator or even consistent NEPA power. I bought his food and his clothes and his transportation fare to the countless job interviews that produced nothing but rejection letters and false promises from potential employers who saw a university dropout with no connections and no future. Each rejection broke something inside him, and I would hold him while he cried into my chest like a child, promising him through my own tears that his day would come, that I believed in him when the entire world had turned its back. When I became pregnant with our daughter Jade, pure terror replaced any joy because I knew my meager salary could barely feed two people adequately, let alone three, including a helpless infant who would depend on us for everything. The night I told Marcus, he broke down sobbing in my arms and whispered brokenly, "I have failed you. I cannot even give you a proper home for our child. What kind of man am I?" I held him tighter and whispered lies about how everything would be fine, even as fear clawed viciously at my throat. I worked until the very day my water broke at my desk, my colleagues screaming in panic, and I returned after just 6 weeks because unpaid maternity leave meant certain starvation for our small family. My body had not healed properly and my breasts leaked milk through my blouses during meetings, leaving humiliating wet stains, but I had no choice because Marcus still had not found work. The shame I felt was suffocating, not shame of my husband, but shame that I could not do more, be more, provide more for the family I loved so desperately. Marcus stayed home with baby Jade during those early months, which sounds noble and progressive until you understand he had absolutely no choice because unemployment left him with nowhere else to be during the day. He spent his days developing elaborate business proposals and attending free networking events at hotel lobbies where he pretended to belong, wearing his one good shirt I had ironed that morning, while I juggled full-time work, infant care, and the crushing psychological weight of being our family's only financial foundation. Some nights I would come home exhausted beyond words to find him holding Jade while she slept peacefully, tears streaming silently down his face in the darkness, and he would whisper so softly I could barely hear, "I am so sorry. I am so sorry, I cannot give you what you deserve. You should have married someone better." And God help me, I would comfort him, stroking his hair, telling him I loved him, that we would get through this storm together, that I had no regrets. My mother visited once during this period, took one look at me cooking jollof rice with Jade strapped to my aching back while Marcus slept at 2 in the afternoon, and she wept openly at our kitchen table. Her tears fell into her palms and she looked at me with such profound grief it was as though she was mourning my death. She begged me to leave this man and come home with my daughter to the family house in Ikoyi where I would want for nothing, where Jade could sleep in a proper nursery instead of a corner of our moldy room. She said through broken sobs, her voice raw with pain, "Bridget, listen to me carefully. I have watched women do this for 40 years. They pour themselves empty into men who promise them the world, and the very moment those men can finally afford the world, they forget who gave them their first sip of water in the desert. He will leave you. Mark my words, my darling, he will leave you the moment he no longer needs you. Your sacrifice will mean nothing to him." I defended Marcus passionately and told her she was wrong and judgmental and bitter because I believed with my whole heart that loyalty always guaranteed reciprocity. I believed that sacrificial love created unbreakable bonds forged in fire. I believed that suffering together meant celebrating together when success finally arrived at our door. I sent my mother away with harsh words, and I did not speak to her for 3 long months because her truth was too painful to hear, too terrifying to acknowledge. I was wrong about everything. Everything shifted dramatically when Jade turned 2 years old and I discovered I was pregnant again with our son Caleb. Marcus finally secured a small contract renovating a block of classrooms at a government primary school in Ikeja. The payment was modest but it represented actual work with actual money, and Marcus attacked that project with the desperate intensity of a drowning man who had finally found something solid to grab onto. He worked 18-hour days, his hands bleeding from manual labor, determination blazing in his eyes like holy fire. He hired 3-day laborers and completed the renovation 2 weeks ahead of schedule and significantly under budget. I was 7 months pregnant, my feet swollen like balloons, my back screaming in constant pain, and I would bring him lunch at the job site. He would kiss my forehead with dusty lips and say with conviction that made my heart soar, "This is it, Elena. This is the beginning of everything I promised you. You saved my life. I will spend the rest of mine making you happy. I swear it." Those words felt like salvation poured directly into my starving soul. The school principal was genuinely impressed and recommended Braxton Construction to a contact in the Ministry of Works who needed someone reliable for a housing development project. That single connection multiplied like seeds planted in fertile soil into more contracts and bigger projects, and within 3 astonishing years, Braxton Construction became one of the most successful and sought-after firms in Lagos, a name people spoke with respect and admiration. We moved from our leaking single-room in Suralere to a stunning 4-bedroom house in Lekki Phase 1 with a generator that hummed steadily and air conditioning that made the children laugh with delight and a gated compound with security guards. I remember walking through those empty rooms for the first time, my hands trembling uncontrollably, tears streaming down my face like rivers because I thought this was it, this was finally the reward for my faith, for my sacrifice, for my love that had never wavered even in our darkest hours. Marcus bought himself a black Range Rover Sport and a Rolex Submariner and began wearing expensive Italian suits to business meetings with Lagos elite. He hired a driver named Emmanuel and a cook named Blessing and a nanny named Grace for the children, even though I repeatedly insisted we should save money and build wealth slowly and responsibly like my father had taught me. When I suggested we should be more conservative with our newfound wealth, Marcus waved me off dismissively and said with irritation creeping into his voice, "You don't understand business, Bridget. You have to look successful to be successful. Image is everything in Nigeria." That dismissal, so casual, so cutting, was the first crack in the foundation I had built with my bare hands. He dismissed my financial concerns like I was a child who understood nothing about the real world, and said I did not understand how success worked in Nigeria, that you had to look wealthy and powerful to attract wealthy and powerful clients who would only do business with people who appeared to be their equals. The man who once cried tears of gratitude when I bought him a 500 naira meal now spent 50,000 naira on a single dinner without blinking, without consulting me, without remembering what hunger felt like. His family, the same relatives who had completely ignored and avoided us during our suffering years when they claimed they had their own overwhelming financial problems to manage, suddenly remembered we existed the very moment Marcus's bank account grew heavy with construction profits. His mother showed up at our beautiful new house in Lekki with a long list of needs that sounded far more like non-negotiable demands than humble requests, and not once, not one single time, did she thank me for keeping her son alive when he had nothing, for feeding him when he was starving, for believing in him when she had abandoned him. His younger brother needed university fees for an expensive private institution in Canada. His cousin needed startup capital for an import-export trading business. His uncle needed money for private hospital medical treatment that only the wealthy could access. When I gently and respectfully suggested to Marcus that we should establish firm boundaries with extended family and focus on building our savings before funding everyone else's dreams and emergencies, Marcus looked at me with cold contempt I had never seen before in all our years together, a look that made me feel like a stranger, like an enemy. His eyes had gone hard and empty, drained of the warmth that used to live there when he looked at me. He said with barely controlled anger, "You have become selfish and individualistic and Western in your thinking. Success means absolutely nothing if you cannot bless and elevate your people and your family. That is our culture." Those words cut deeper than any knife because they rewrote our entire history together, erasing my sacrifice as though it had never existed. But I remembered clearly, painfully, vividly, that these very people had not blessed us or elevated us when we were eating one meal daily and wondering how to pay rent. They had not answered my desperate calls when I needed to borrow money for Marcus's business registration. They had not attended our wedding or celebrated Jade's birth or sent even a text message when Caleb was born premature and fighting for his life in NICU while I worked double overtime to pay the mounting hospital bills. Now they wanted everything, and my husband gave it to them freely, pouring money into bottomless pits, as though my years of sacrifice had purchased nothing, earned nothing, meant absolutely nothing to anyone. The emotional distance between us grew wider and more painful as Marcus's business empire expanded rapidly and his social circle elevated far beyond my reach. He began attending exclusive social events and industry functions without inviting me, casually saying with barely concealed impatience that I would not be interested in the boring conversations or would not fit in comfortably with his new colleagues and their sophisticated wives who spoke French and wore designer everything. Each excuse was a small death, a tiny erasure. When his business partners and wealthy clients visited our home for drinks and dinner, Marcus introduced me simply and coldly as my wife with absolutely no mention of the years I had carried him financially and emotionally, no mention of the secretary who had paid his way, no mention of the woman who had believed in him when his own family had not, no mention of the sacrifices that had built the very floor he stood on. I had become an embarrassing footnote in his glorious success story, an inconvenient truth he desperately wanted erased from his narrative. He questioned sharply why I needed money for a new dress or shoes but bought himself designer accessories worth hundreds of thousands without hesitation or consultation, as though my needs were frivolous but his were essential. The man who once thanked me genuinely every single night for every meal I provided, kissing my hands with gratitude, stopped noticing entirely when I cooked his favorite dishes, stopped seeing me at all. I felt myself becoming invisible and irrelevant in the home I had sacrificed everything to build, a ghost haunting rooms that no longer recognized me, and when I tried desperately to initiate conversations about the growing distance between us, Marcus accused me of being ungrateful and bitter about the comfortable life he had given us. The irony was suffocating, crushing. He genuinely believed he had given me this life, as though it had not been built on the foundation of my broken body and depleted bank account and shattered dreams. He genuinely could not see that he had given us nothing that I had not first given him. Or perhaps he saw it perfectly clearly and simply did not care anymore because I was no longer useful. Her name was Chidinma, and she worked as a relationship manager at the bank where Marcus maintained his substantial business accounts. I first heard about her from my friend Ngozi, who saw them having an intimate lunch at a five-star hotel restaurant in Victoria Island, their heads bent close together in whispered conversation, his hand covering hers on the white tablecloth in a gesture far too familiar for a business meeting. When Ngozi told me, describing every painful detail, I felt the earth shift violently beneath my feet. I confronted Marcus directly that evening, my voice shaking with hurt and rage and disbelief, and he did not deny it convincingly but he also did not confirm it honestly. He said with practiced smoothness that Chidinma was simply helping him navigate complex financial transactions for an upcoming commercial project. He said my jealousy was embarrassing him in front of important people in the business community, that I was acting like an insecure village woman. He turned my legitimate pain and reasonable suspicion into a personality defect so skillfully and manipulatively that I began questioning my own eyes and instincts, wondering if perhaps I was losing my mind, if perhaps the years of sacrifice had broken something fundamental inside me that made me see betrayal where there was only business. The late nights at the office increased dramatically. The business trips to Abuja became weekly instead of monthly occurrences. His phone remained permanently face down on every surface and password protected at all times, hidden like precious contraband. When our son Caleb turned 7 years old, Marcus missed his birthday party entirely because of what he claimed was an emergency client meeting that absolutely could not be rescheduled. I later discovered through bank statements I found in his jacket pocket that it was actually a weekend getaway to Dubai with Chidinma, 4 days, presidential suite, champagne service, room service charges that made me physically sick. That night, I held that receipt in my shaking hands while my son had cried himself to sleep asking me through heartbroken sobs why daddy didn't love him enough to come to his party, why work was more important than him. That night, holding that damning piece of paper, something inside me died. Not my love, that stubborn, foolish thing refused to die quickly, but my hope. My hope died that night, and the grief was absolutely unbearable, like mourning someone who was still alive. My younger sister Justina was experiencing her own devastating version of this betrayal with her boyfriend Ryan Sullivan, an Irish musician she had met at a bar in Lagos. She had supported Ryan emotionally and financially through 3 difficult years of struggle while he pursued a music career that produced nothing but empty promises, demo recordings nobody wanted to sign, and completely depleted bank accounts. Justina worked long, exhausting hours at an accounting firm and paid Ryan's rent in a small flat in Suralere, bought all his food and clothes and cigarettes, and purchased expensive studio equipment and recording software on installment payment plans that strained her modest salary to absolute breaking point. I watched my baby sister give everything to a man who gave her nothing but songs about love that meant nothing when the bills came due at the end of each month. Her friends warned her constantly, staging interventions, that Ryan was using her generosity, that he was a parasite bleeding her dry. Our mother, still wounded and disappointed by my own disastrous choices, begged Justina desperately not to repeat my mistakes, her voice breaking with the terror of watching history repeat itself in her younger daughter. But Justina believed Ryan's passionate promises with shining eyes that once his music career finally launched successfully, they would get married properly in a church and she would never have to struggle financially again, that he would take care of her the way she had taken care of him. She believed him the way I had believed Marcus, with a faith so pure and complete it was almost religious, almost holy. Then Ryan produced a song that unexpectedly went viral on social media and signed with a major record label that transformed him literally overnight from poverty to prominence and wealth. Success came so fast it was almost violent, like watching someone get struck by lightning and survive. Ryan's social media following exploded from a few hundred followers to hundreds of thousands within mere months. Money that had been imaginary and theoretical became substantial and real and flowing. The boy who could not afford public transport fare suddenly had a BMW, a new apartment in an expensive Lekki neighborhood with a view, and a wardrobe full of designer labels with tags still attached. Justina naturally expected their relationship to finally stabilize into the partnership she had been promised for 3 long years, the partnership she had earned with her sacrifice. She had already started looking at wedding dresses online, planning the life they had talked about in whispered conversations in the dark. Instead, Ryan methodically created distance between them like he was following a calculated plan. He stopped inviting her to his performances and industry events, making excuses about capacity and guest lists. He posted photographs with beautiful women draped all over him on his social media and dismissively called them colleagues and collaborators when Justina questioned him with trembling voice and tear-stained cheeks, her heart breaking in real time. Last week, Ryan sent Justina a cold text message at 11 at night saying he needed to focus entirely on his career and could not be in a serious relationship right now, that she should understand. Yesterday, Justina saw photographs of Ryan at an exclusive nightclub with an Instagram model with 1 million followers draped across his lap, kissing his neck, and she called me sobbing so violently and desperately that I could barely understand her broken words through the phone, could barely make out her voice through the animal sounds of grief. The sounds she made were not quite human, they were the sounds of a soul breaking apart in real time, shattering into pieces that could never be put back together. The pain in her voice was my pain. Her devastation was my devastation. We were living the same nightmare in different relationships, and the cruelty of that parallel was almost unbearable, almost too much to survive. I held Justina tightly while she cried in my living room, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her lungs, from some place in her soul that had been ripped open, and I saw my younger self reflected perfectly in her devastation, the complete disbelief that loyalty and sacrifice could be discarded so carelessly, thrown away like garbage on collection day. The burning shame of having ignored every warning from people who loved us and tried to save us. The crushing realization that the man you built from nothing does not feel even remotely obligated to remember who laid his foundation and held him up when he could not stand alone, when the whole world had turned its back on him. We sat together in that painful silence that only betrayed women truly understand, a silence that speaks louder than any words, and I felt my own marriage crumbling around me even as I tried desperately to comfort her with words I did not believe myself. 2 sisters who had given everything to men who gave back nothing but abandonment and lies and heartbreak. 2 sisters who had believed that love was enough, that sacrifice guaranteed partnership, that loyalty purchased forever. That night, Marcus came home after midnight smelling of perfume that was definitely not mine, jasmine and vanilla, sickly sweet and cloying, nothing like the subtle rose scent I had worn faithfully for 13 years, and I knew with absolute certainty that my time as his wife was ending whether I accepted it or not. The question was no longer if, but when. And the not knowing was its own special torture, its own particular hell. Across the Atlantic Ocean in Portland, Oregon, a woman named Lisa Fletcher was discovering she was pregnant exactly 2 weeks after her boyfriend of 4 years, Trevor Banks, abruptly ended their relationship via text message, a coward's goodbye, clinical and cold and devastating. Lisa had worked double shifts as a dental hygienist to support Trevor through his grueling medical residency program, sacrificing her own dreams of becoming a nurse so he could pursue his ambitions without the burden of financial stress weighing him down. She packed his lunches with love notes tucked inside and quizzed him before major exams while he snapped at her in frustration and paid their entire rent in a tiny apartment with cockroaches, and believed his promises that their financial struggle was only temporary, that one day he would take care of her the way she had taken care of him, that their real life would begin after residency. When Trevor completed his residency and accepted a prestigious cardiology position at a private hospital with a 6-figure salary, Lisa expected their real life together to finally begin, the wedding they had planned in whispers under covers, the children they had named in dreams, the house with a garden. Instead, Trevor suggested coldly one morning over coffee that she should upgrade her appearance and improve her conversation skills for the professional dinners he now attended regularly with colleagues who, he implied with barely concealed disgust, were more polished and sophisticated than she would ever be. Then he sent a text message saying he needed to focus on his career. 2 weeks later, Lisa saw Trevor's engagement announcement on social media to Vanessa, a pharmaceutical sales representative with an Ivy League degree and the right credentials and social class for his new world, a woman who had never held his hair while he vomited from stress during exams, who had never worked herself to exhaustion so he could study in peace, who had never sacrificed a single thing for him. Lisa's mother, who had worked as a waitress for 20 brutal years to send Lisa to community college, had warned her daughter repeatedly and desperately that Trevor would leave once he no longer needed her support, that men like him saw women as tools to be used and discarded. Her mother had seen this story play out 100 times before, had lived versions of it herself with Lisa's father. Lisa had dismissed these warnings as bitterness from her mother's own painful failed marriage, as the paranoid projections of a woman who didn't understand that real love was different, that Trevor was different. Now Lisa sat alone in her bathroom at 3 in the morning holding a positive pregnancy test in one trembling hand and Trevor's breakup text in the other, understanding far too late that her mother's bitterness was actually wisdom born from experience and observation, that bitterness was sometimes just truth that had aged poorly, truth that had been proven right too many times. Through social media posts that felt like knives stabbing into her chest, Lisa discovered Trevor was already planning a destination wedding in the Maldives, somewhere that cost more than Lisa earned in 6 months of grueling work. Lisa was facing single motherhood with absolutely no savings because every dollar she earned had gone toward building a man who forgot her name the very moment he achieved success, who erased her from his story like she had never existed. She had nothing left but a baby growing in her belly and regret that tasted like poison in her mouth and a rage so pure and bright it could have powered the sun. In Seattle, Washington, Julia Chambers watched her husband of 8 years, Nathan, methodically pack his belongings into expensive leather suitcases while their daughters Lily and Rose slept innocently in the next room, completely unaware that their father was abandoning their family like a sinking ship, like rats fleeing disaster. Nathan's tech startup, which Julia had funded entirely through her work as a hairstylist for 4 years while he generated zero income and played with code in their garage, had recently been valued at $20 million after securing venture capital investment from Silicon Valley firms. The man who used to thank Julia every single night for holding their family together, the man who had once wept in gratitude when she worked a 16-hour day to pay for his laptop when his broke, now told her coldly with eyes like ice that he had outgrown their marriage. He said she did not understand his world anymore, that she was too simple for the complexity of his new life. He said he needed a partner who matched his new level of success and sophistication, someone who could discuss market disruption and scaling strategies and artificial intelligence at cocktail parties with investors, not someone who smelled like hairspray and talked about split ends. Yesterday, Julia discovered through careless conversation from her daughters that Nathan had been seeing Christiana, a marketing executive he met at a tech conference in San Francisco. The betrayal was complete and devastating, a knife twisted slowly into her heart and left there to rust. For women across 2 continents facing identical betrayals in vastly different circumstances. Bridget and Julia, married with children, suddenly served with divorce papers after building their husbands from poverty to prosperity. Justina and Lisa, unmarried and abandoned by boyfriends they supported through struggling years into success, discarded like used tissues when they were no longer needed. All 4 experiencing the devastating truth that male gratitude often expires the moment female utility ends, that some men see women as stepping stones rather than partners, useful only until they reach higher ground, then disposable. All 4 left without preparation, dignity, or the partnerships they were promised repeatedly, the futures they had earned with their sacrifice. I did not know about Lisa or Julia yet, but I would meet them eventually at a conference that would change all our lives forever. For now, I only knew my own pain and Justina's, and it felt like enough suffering to drown us both, to pull us under dark water and never let us surface. We cried together most nights, 2 women who had believed in love and partnership and discovered betrayal instead, 2 women who had given everything and been given nothing in return except heartbreak and humiliation and shame. Marcus served me with divorce papers on a Wednesday morning while Jade and Caleb were at school, deliberately choosing a time when they would not witness my devastation, because even in his cruelty, he wanted to maintain his carefully crafted image as a decent man, a good father, someone who had done nothing wrong. His lawyer, an older man in an expensive suit that probably cost more than I earned in 3 months, explained the settlement terms with clinical detachment while Marcus stared at his phone, unable or unwilling to face what he was doing to the family I had built and protected with my own body and blood and tears. I would receive $3,000 monthly in temporary support, no claim whatsoever to the business I had funded with my secretary's salary and my grandmother's precious jewelry, and 30 days to vacate the family home I had helped purchase with my years of sacrifice. 30 days. As though 13 years could be packed into boxes and erased in 30 days. When I reminded Marcus through tears that I had paid our rent for 5 consecutive years while he built his company from nothing, while he had nothing to offer but dreams, his lawyer said calmly, like he was discussing the weather, that those were gifts freely given with no legal expectation of return. Gifts. My sacrifice had been reduced to gifts, my years of suffering dismissed as voluntary charity. When I mentioned that I had sold my grandmother's antique jewelry, the only thing of value I had ever owned, the only connection to the woman who had raised my mother with love, to keep us from being evicted during our worst months, Marcus finally looked at me directly and said with disgust dripping from every word that I was being dramatic and vindictive and bitter. The man I had loved and sacrificed for had become a stranger, someone I did not recognize. Worse, he had become my enemy. And the man sitting across from me, this stranger wearing Marcus's face, felt nothing as he erased me from his life with legal documents and cold efficiency, like deleting a file from a computer. I moved with Jade and Caleb into a small 2-bedroom apartment in Aja, far from the lucky Phase 1 life I had helped build brick by brick with my bare hands and broken dreams. The children cried inconsolably every night asking why their father did not live with us anymore and why we had to leave our beautiful home with the garden where they played and the swing set Marcus had promised to push them on forever. Jade, my sensitive girl, stopped eating properly, her ribs starting to show. Caleb started wetting the bed again at 7 years old, something he had not done since he was 3, waking up crying in shame. I had no honest answers that would not poison them against their father, no words that would not make them hate the man who had abandoned us, so I said through my own tears that sometimes adults need space to figure things out. Jade, who was 9 and perceptive beyond her years, asked me directly with old eyes if space meant forever. I held her close and lied that it did not, even though I knew deep in my soul that Marcus had already erased us from his narrative. We were inconvenient chapters he wanted to skip over in the success story he was telling himself and everyone else. Justina moved in with us because she could not afford her own rent after Ryan stopped returning her calls and she stopped being able to focus properly at work, her grief consuming her like a slow-burning fire that never went out. The first month after everything collapsed was the darkest period of my entire life, darker than anything I had experienced before. My small savings evaporated quickly, paying the security deposit and furnishing our bare apartment with second-hand furniture that smelled like other people's lives and carried their sadness. The $3,000 Marcus sent covered rent and school fees but left almost nothing for food or transportation or anything beyond basic survival. I applied for dozens of jobs, but my 5-year employment gap made me essentially unemployable in competitive markets. I had sacrificed my career for a man who had rewarded me with abandonment, and now I was paying the price. Justina was falling apart emotionally, calling in sick to work so frequently that her supervisor put her on final probation, threatening termination. We ate rice and beans most days, sometimes just once a day. The children wore school uniforms I hand-washed nightly because I could not afford duplicates, my hands raw and cracked from cheap detergent and cold water. I cried in the shower so Jade and Caleb would not hear me, water mixing with tears, and I wondered constantly if my mother had been right all along about Marcus, if I had wasted 13 years of my life on a man who had never deserved me, who had taken my sacrifice as his due rather than his blessing. I felt like a complete failure, as a wife, as a mother, as a woman. I felt like I had destroyed not just my own life but my children's lives too. The shame was suffocating, crushing my chest. The regret was unbearable, a physical pain. And the loneliness, God, the loneliness was a living thing that ate at me every silent night, consuming me piece by piece. Then something unexpected happened that changed our trajectory completely, that gave us a tiny spark of hope in the overwhelming darkness. My former tutoring student, Whitney, who I had taught mathematics 2 years ago when I was supplementing my income during my marriage, contacted me through Facebook. Whitney was now studying at the University of Lagos and struggling desperately with statistics. She asked if I would tutor her again and mentioned she could pay. I agreed immediately, desperate for any income, any purpose, any reason to believe I was still valuable to someone, that I still had something to offer the world. Whitney mentioned me to 3 classmates who also needed help desperately. Within 2 weeks, I had 8 students paying me for weekend tutoring sessions. It was not much money, barely anything really, but it was mine, earned through my own effort and skill rather than given as obligation or pity. And for the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. Magnolia watched me teach one Saturday and said through tears of her own, "Bridget, you're so good at this. You make everything make sense. You could build something real with this gift." She suggested I could build something much larger than weekend sessions, something that could actually support us, and I saw a spark return to her eyes, hope finding its way back after devastating loss. I started researching online education platforms and to create video courses that students could purchase and watch repeatedly at their convenience. The initial setup was difficult because I had no camera equipment or technical skills, but I used my phone and taught myself basic video editing through free YouTube tutorials, staying up until 3 in the morning after the children slept, my eyes burning with exhaustion but my heart burning brighter with purpose. I created my first course on JAM mathematics preparation and priced it modestly at 5,000 Naira. Justina helped me set up social media accounts to promote it, and we worked together like we had as children, finding strength in our shared pain and shared determination. The first week, 3 people purchased it. The second week, 12 people. By the end of the first month, over 100 students had enrolled, and I had earned significantly more than Marcus's monthly support payment. For the first time since the divorce, I felt something other than desperation. I felt genuine possibility and hope. I felt like maybe, just maybe, I could survive this. That maybe my life was not over. That maybe I could build something beautiful from the ruins of my marriage. Justina began healing gradually as she watched me build something meaningful from our shared wreckage. She stopped crying daily and started helping me film tutorial videos with better production quality. She suggested we expand beyond JAM preparation into professional courses for adults, things like basic accounting and financial literacy, skills that could change lives the way our lives had been destroyed by financial dependence on men who had proven unreliable. We created a business plan for an online education platform called Path Forward Learning. We had no capital and no investors, but we had determination forged in betrayal and skills sharpened by necessity. We had nothing left to lose and everything to prove. We worked every evening after the children slept, building content and marketing strategies, dreaming bigger than we had ever allowed ourselves to dream before. 3 months after Marcus destroyed my life, I was earning twice what he sent in support. 6 months later, I did not need his money at all, but I took it anyway and invested every naira in our growing business, building my future on the ashes of my past. Meanwhile, Marcus's life was quietly unraveling in ways I only learned about later through mutual acquaintances who watched his downfall with schadenfreude and reported back to me with gleeful detail. Chidinma, the woman he had left me for, was expensive in ways I had never been. She demanded designer everything and lavish vacations and a lifestyle that strained even Marcus's substantial income. His family's demands had not decreased, and without me managing household finances and pushing back against unreasonable requests, Marcus was hemorrhaging money maintaining appearances. Several of his business contracts fell through because the attention to detail and relationship management I had provided during our marriage was absent. I had been his backbone, and without me, he was collapsing in slow motion. His younger brother, who Marcus had sent to university in Canada with borrowed money, dropped out after 1 semester and was now demanding more money to start a cryptocurrency venture that would obviously fail. His mother was pressuring him to marry Chidinma properly, but Chidinma was already seeing someone else, a wealthier man, an oil executive, someone who could afford her champagne tastes more easily. Karma was working silently, and it was beautiful. 1 year after the divorce, I received an invitation to speak at the West African Women's Economic Summit in Accra, Ghana about building successful businesses from adversity. Path Forward Learning now had over 5,000 enrolled students and had generated enough revenue that Justina and I both quit our jobs to focus on it full-time. We had hired 3 additional instructors and were expanding into vocational training. We were building an empire from nothing, the same way I had built Marcus, except this time the empire would never betray me. The summit organizers had read an interview I gave to a business magazine about starting my company with 8 tutoring students and a phone camera. They wanted me to share my story with women entrepreneurs across the continent. I accepted the invitation immediately, my hands shaking as I read the email, tears streaming down my face because this was vindication. This was proof that I had value beyond what I could provide to a man. Justina insisted on coming with me for support, and we boarded that plane to Accra like we were boarding a rocket to a new world. At the summit in Accra, I met Lisa Fletcher and Julia Chambers during a networking breakfast, and within 10 minutes of conversation, we realized we were living variations of the exact same story, that our pain was universal, that our betrayal was archetypal, that we were not alone in this devastating experience. Lisa had launched a non-profit organization providing financial literacy and career counseling to women supporting partners through professional school, channeling her pain into purpose. Her son Alex was 6 months old, and she was raising him alone while building something meaningful from the pain Trevor had caused. She showed me photographs of her baby boy, and when she talked about him, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of fierce protective love. "He will never treat a woman the way his father treated me," she said, her voice breaking with emotion. "I will raise him to understand that sacrifice demands gratitude, that loyalty demands reciprocity, that women are not stepping stones to be discarded once you reach higher ground." Julia had opened her own salon in Seattle and was developing a natural hair care product line that was gaining serious market attention. Her daughters Lily and Rose were thriving, and Nathan's company was facing lawsuits from former partners he had betrayed the same way he betrayed her. Karma was catching up to him with legal precision. When Julia spoke about her daughters, her entire face transformed with love so pure it hurt to witness. "They ask me sometimes why Daddy left," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "And I tell them that sometimes people forget where they came from when they finally arrive where they're going. But we will never forget. We will remember who we are and what we're worth." We sat together sharing our stories and crying and laughing, and Justina joined us because her story was ours too. For women who had been told we were not enough once we had given everything. For women who had been discarded like garbage after serving as foundations for empires we would never benefit from. For women who had believed that love meant sacrifice, only to learn that some men interpret sacrifice as weakness and loyalty as stupidity. We were survivors becoming victors, phoenixes rising from ashes that still burned. We exchanged contact information and promised to stay connected, to support each other, to remind each other on dark days that we were not crazy, not vindictive, not bitter. We were simply women who had learned the hardest lesson life can teach, that you cannot love someone into loving you back, that you cannot sacrifice enough to guarantee partnership, that some people will take everything you offer and still leave you with nothing. We created a support network that day that extended far beyond the summit, a sisterhood forged in shared pain and collective determination. For women across 2 continents who had been discarded by men we built, now building empires of our own and teaching other women that loyalty to a partner should never mean abandonment of self-preservation. We started a private online group where we shared resources, encouragement, and honest truths about the realities of rebuilding after betrayal. The group grew quickly as other women found us, hundreds, then thousands of women with similar stories, all of us carrying scars that looked remarkably alike. I learned that Marcus had lost his construction company to debt and family mismanagement within 2 years of our divorce. The business I had helped him birth had died without me there to protect it. Ryan's music career had stalled after his label dropped him for unprofessional behavior and substance abuse issues that had apparently developed alongside his fame. Trevor's hospital was investigating him for inappropriate relationships with staff, and his engagement to Vanessa had ended in scandal when she discovered he was cheating on her too. A leopard does not change its spots, only its prey. Nathan's company had collapsed entirely after it was revealed he had been embezzling investor funds to maintain his lavish lifestyle, and he was facing potential criminal charges. Their karma was not our revenge. We had not wished these things upon them, had not celebrated their suffering. It was simply the natural consequence of losing the women who had been their foundation, their conscience, their backbone. Men who build success on women's backs often discover they never learned to stand on their own. We did not celebrate their downfalls, but we did acknowledge them quietly among ourselves, not with joy, but with a sense of cosmic justice being served. We celebrated our rises instead. Because the best response to being underestimated is becoming undeniable. The best revenge is building a life so beautiful, so successful, so full of purpose that the man who discarded you realizes too late what he lost. 2 years after the divorce, Path Forward Learning was valued at over $2 million. Justina and I had been featured in Forbes Africa as emerging entrepreneurs to watch. My children, Jade and Caleb, were thriving in their new school, surrounded by love and stability I had built with my own hands. They knew their father had left, but they also knew their mother had stayed and fought and won. Jade told me one night as I tucked her into bed, "Mommy, I want to be like you when I grow up. Strong and smart and brave." I held her close and cried into her hair, because that was the legacy I wanted to leave. Not bitterness. Not victimhood. But strength forged in fire and wisdom earned through pain. Marcus reached out to me through email 6 months ago. The message was long and rambling, full of apologies that felt hollow and regrets that came too late. He said he had made terrible mistakes. He said he had taken me for granted and realized too late what he had lost. He said Chidinma had left him for someone wealthier, that his business had failed, that his family had abandoned him once the money dried up, that he was living in a small apartment in Ikeja and struggling to make ends meet. He said he understood now what I had done for him, what I had sacrificed, what I had built. He asked if we could meet to talk, if there was any possibility of reconciliation, if I could find it in my heart to forgive him. He said our children needed their father. He said he needed me. I read that email 3 times, and each time I felt different things. The first time, I felt a surge of vindication. He had finally admitted the truth, finally acknowledged what I had always known. The second time, I felt profound sadness, for the man he could have been, for the partnership we could have had, for the love that had been real once before he destroyed it. The third time, I felt nothing. Just emptiness. Just closure. I wrote back a single line, "I forgive you for me, not for you." But forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. I have rebuilt my life without you. and I will continue forward without you. I wish you healing and growth, but not with me. Our chapter ended when you signed those papers. Do not contact me again except regarding the children's welfare. I sent that email and I felt something lift from my chest, a weight I had been carrying for years without even realizing it. The weight of hoping he would realize his mistake. The weight of waiting for an apology. The weight of needing him to acknowledge what he had done. I did not need his apology anymore. I did not need his acknowledgement. I had built my own validation through my success, through my children's love, through the women I was helping every day through Path Forward Learning. I had become my own foundation, and no man could ever shake me again. To every woman reading this, hear me clearly and let my words sink deep into your bones. Never abandon yourself while building a man. Your loyalty should include loyalty to yourself first, always, and forever. Plan for the unplanned. Save your own money in accounts only you control. Maintain your own skills and your own career and your own identity separate from any relationship. Because the man you sacrifice everything for today might be the man who walks away tomorrow without looking back. And when he does, and statistics and experience tell us that far too many do, you need to have something left of yourself to stand on. You need to have built your own foundation so that when he removes himself from your life, you do not collapse. You bend, you grieve, you hurt, but you do not break. Because you were whole before him and you will be whole after him. Love with your whole heart, yes. Support your partner, yes. Build together, yes. But never, never, give so much that you have nothing left for yourself. Never sacrifice so completely that your own dreams die to feed his. Never make yourself so small that he forgets you were ever big enough to lift him up. Keep your own bank account. Keep your own friends. Keep your own dreams. Keep your own identity. Because a man who truly loves you will want you to keep all of these things. A man who truly loves you will never ask you to diminish yourself so he can shine brighter. A man who truly loves you will remember that your sacrifice was a choice, not an obligation, and he will spend his life honoring that choice. And if you find yourself in the position I found myself in, discarded after years of sacrifice, abandoned after building someone from nothing, erased after being essential, know this, you will survive. You will hurt so badly you think the pain will kill you, but it will not. You will cry until you have no tears left, and then you will cry some more. You will question everything about yourself, wonder what you did wrong, torture yourself with what-ifs and if-onlys. You will feel like a failure. You will feel like a fool. You will feel like you wasted your best years on someone who never deserved them. Feel all of it. Do not run from the pain. Sit with it. Let it wash over you. Let it break you open. Because on the other side of that breaking is a strength you never knew you had. On the other side of that pain is a woman who knows her worth because she learned the hard way what happens when you forget it. You will rebuild. Slowly at first, one small step at a time. One job application. One course enrollment. One new skill learned. One friend called. One day survived. And then those small steps will become bigger strides, and you will look back one day and realize you have traveled miles from where you started. You will build something beautiful from the ruins, maybe a business, maybe a career, maybe just a life that is authentically yours and no one else's. You will raise your children if you have them, and you will teach them through your example what resilience looks like, what strength looks like, what self-love looks like. You will become the woman you needed when you were breaking. And that woman, that survivor, that warrior, that phoenix, she is magnificent. My name is Bridget Whitmore Okafor. I built a man from nothing and he left me with nothing. So I built myself from nothing, and no one can ever take that away from me. This is my story. This is my truth. This is my testimony. And if even one woman reads these words and decides to save something of herself while giving to someone else, then every tear I cried was worth it. Every sleepless night was worth it. Every moment of pain was worth it. Because we rise by lifting others, and I lift you now with these words. You are enough. You were always enough. You will always be enough. And any man who cannot see that does not deserve the gift of your sacrifice. The end is just the beginning. My story did not end with divorce papers and betrayal. It began there. And yours can too.